Hello everyone, my name is Tabernac John. You can call me John T for short. Anyway, welcome back to the bench and the good old green Tamiya mat. Anyway, let me just move in here. Alright. So, I've been getting some questions after the reloading video about primers. So I thought I'd make a separate video explaining just some details concerning them. Now, if you're one of those in the know, or you have a bit more knowledge than everyone else and you're just here for the one question, which is, can I use large rifle primers and large rifle or large Magnum rifle primers interchangeably? The answer is shorthand, yes. The longer answer is depends on what you're doing. If you have a large, physically larger amount of volume, like you're loading a 3.3 at Lapua or something, you might want to go with the large Magnum rifle primers, because large rifle and large rifle Magnum primers, the only difference is that the large Magnum rifle burns for hotter and a bit longer, and that allows for a more reliable source of ignition. So the other reason you'd use these over the regular is because you're having issues with ignition, like in cold weather. Hopefully that helps, if that's all you're here for. Glad I could. But if you want to stick around and learn more about primers, feel free. Anywho, second question, how do primers work? In general, in the modern day, there are two types of primers. There is rimfire primers and centerfire primers. Now, as the name suggests, the priming compound in rimfire is in the rim. Here we have a 22LR. Excuse my thumb there. I was out shooting and was demonstrating the 1897 safety, and I did the Paul Harrell thing of letting the hammer slip, and it actually bit my thumb a bit, so no, that is not dirt. So anyway, back to the actual presentation. So this is a 22LR. The priming compound is in a disc at the base of the cartridge here. And so what happens is the firing pin is more like a firing hammer, and it smushes it against the receiver, and that smushing sets off the priming compound, and the priming compound sets off the powder charge, and the powder charge pushes the bullet down the barrel because it's the path of least resistance. So these are one-time use. You can't really reuse them because you'd have to replace the entire thing, take out the priming compound disc or what remains of it, and put in an entirely new one. So these are cheap and disposable. The reason the 22LR is still around is because of that. You can still get a box of 50 for less than $5 nowadays. So the prices used to be even cheaper, but you know, we move on. March of time and all that. This, comparatively, is a 303. And if you take a look at the back, you'll notice that there's this little silver circle here, and that is the centerfire primer. We call it centerfire because the priming mechanism is in the center of the cartridge. Now, this is more akin to what you see in handguns and all other rifles. The reason for that is because A, you can't reuse these brass pieces, and B, rimfire on a large scale is not very reliable. This is a lot more reliable. Anyway, there are many sizes of primers. There is small pistol, large pistol, small rifle, large primer or large rifle, and then there's specialty primers for other cartridges. I believe the 50 BMG also has its own primer size, but I haven't really messed with those. So, but This right here, this old 303 uses large rifle primers. That's what we're going to focus on today, really, because I don't actually have any pistol primers or small rifle or large pistol. So, sorry guys, you'll have to make do with that. So, when the gun goes off, the firing pin or striker is released, and what it strikes on a centerfire cartridge is the primer in the middle. Here's a good example of that. This is a factory fired, what is this, S&B 303 British case. Now, some of you may be wondering why this one is more brass colored. That's just really up to the manufacturer and their materials. It doesn't really change anything. But the thing that matters here is that dent in the middle. As you saw, this one lacks that dent. This one has that dent. And the dent is indicative of this cartridge has been used. So you can see there's no bullet, there's no powder. So after you strike that primer, it crushes a little bit of that priming compound against what we call the anvil. And I'll give you a good look at that in a moment. But the act of crushing it creates a spark, or rather, I guess, a flame, and that flame ignites the rest of the powder charge. Now, here in this dish, my priming dish, I have some primers. So, this is what you can see on the outside, like usual. But if you were to look on the inside of the cartridge, that is what it looks like. It's kind of a radiation warning logo. And that little radiation warning logo is actually a separate piece from the cup here. Because it kind of looks like a cup. And so the cup is filled with priming compound, and this little secondary piece is what it is struck against. And the little radiation logo piece, as I'm going to call it, is called the anvil. So, just like in a blacksmith's forge, you take your hammer and you hit the piece of metal in between it and the anvil. It's the same concept here. So if you're not hitting a piece of metal, you're hitting priming compound. Some of you may ask why the bottom two are more blue than the top one. I don't know. Usually this does not have any bearing on its effect. Some older guys will tell you, oh, if it's blue, it's waterproof. If it's red, it's harder. I wouldn't corroborate that. I've seen many different colors over the years. The only thing that makes them different is the manufacturer. So, but in essence, rimfire works by crushing a large wafer of priming compound in between the rim and the gun itself. Centerfire works by crushing the primer, which is centered in the middle of the cartridge at the base, between the surface of the primer and the surface of the anvil. Centerfire is way more reliable than rimfire, but rimfire is cheaper than centerfire. So there is how primers work, and there is types of primers. Now, there are, at least nowadays, two main types of centerfire primers. There is Boxer and Berdan. Let me just open up the tray here. The difference between Boxer and Berdan primers is the location of the anvil. On Boxer primers, the anvil is located in the priming cup. So if you remove the primer, you'll be removing both the primer and the anvil. On Berdan primed cases, the primer is actually physically attached, or sorry, the anvil is physically attached to the casing. So if you can remove the primer, the anvil would stay behind. Most, I guess you could say, comm block militaries use Berdan priming, I assume because it's cheaper, but I don't know for certain actually. But especially in surplus stuff, your Chinese, your Russian, your, I believe also Czech, a lot of that stuff is Berdan primed. I believe it's a cost-effective measure, but again, don't quote me directly on that. Secondarily, some people will ask me after stating that, can you modify Berdan primers to take boxer primers? And my simple answer to that would be, I wouldn't suggest it, but I'm sure you could jerry-rig it too. But really, why would you? Steel, a lot of this is employed in coupling with steel casing, and steel cases are not very pleasant to work with when reloading. So I don't know why you'd go through the entire process of collecting steel casings, processing them, and then modifying them when you could just buy or pick up brass casings from the range. I don't personally pick up brass casings, and I wouldn't suggest it, but I would pick up brass casings before I would try to reload steel casings. Now, that's not to say all steel casing ammunition is Berdan primed, but I am comfortable in saying most steel cased military surplus, especially from China or Russia, is Berdan primed, and you cannot reload it. Or I wouldn't advise reloading them. I'm sure someone has done it, but in my humble opinion, it is not really worth the effort, honestly. I'd say I'd sooner buy the ammunition, shoot it off, and reload the brass. At least that's my own little humble opinion here. So, we've covered, Berdan versus boxer priming and Berdan modification. Now, while we're on the topic of Berdan priming, a lot of military surplus is corrosive. They don't always go hand in hand, Berdan priming and corrosive primers, but it's more of a case of, more often than not, Berdan primed stuff is corrosive. Again, it's not hand in hand. What's causing the corrosiveness is the priming compound itself. So what happens with corrosive primers is when the primer is struck, and after ignition, it will create a chemical reaction which will create salts, and the salts will react with moisture in the air, and then that moisture reaction will create rust. So the salts will permeate as a fine dust, and then the moisture in the air will react, creating rust. It is not the fault of the powder, although there is corrosive powder like cordite. Cordite is used to be used by the British Army in their 303 loads, and that stuff was corrosive. But most cases nowadays, it's not the powder that's corrosive, it's the priming compounds, especially again in military surplus like Chinese and Russian surplus. So, and in my opinion, that's another reason why I wouldn't use steel case and modify it to take boxer primers. But I just feel like I should mention that. People get confused on what is the corrosive part of surplus cartridges, and it's often the primers. So there is that. And Lastly, people ask me for primer recommendations. And so I have had the, I guess, I don't know if I'd call it the pleasure, but I've had the experience of testing out many primers during this primer shortage that we've had the last, I don't know, 3-4 years. And here's just some of the stuff I've tried out. And what I can say is most of this stuff performs exactly the same. I don't think any of it really has a difference in accuracy or reliability. So what we'll do is we'll go through the stack here. This is Bosnia and Herzegovina Gynex military primers. These are large rifle and nickel plated. I've had good luck with these. These were the very first stuff I was able to acquire during the shortage. They were not cheap. Neither were these. These are German primers. These for this sleeve of 100, it cost me 22 Canadian pesos. So again, relatively, these were not cheap, especially for pre-pandemic costs. Remington primers here. These are some of the newer stuff I bought. It's definitely cheaper than both the Bosnian and German stuff. This is commercial production, whereas these two were military production surplus. Although these are just as effective as all of the other ones. White River, these are the newest ones I've got. They're from an LLC in the States, and they work just as well as the others. Fiocchi, by far, is the most expensive stuff, although they come in a sleeve of 150. It was like $32 for the sleeve. I don't really use these. I just wanted to buy them because of that exotic flair you get to them. Really, I wouldn't buy these because they're way too expensive for the extra 50 in a sleeve. And the bread and butter of what I use is federal stuff. So large Magnum rifle primers and large rifle primers. This is mostly what I use every day. They're cheap and they're more abundant than everything else. The most abundant stuff, at least in my area, is the Remington stuff and the federal stuff. It used to be these two, but the supplies kind of dried up now, and no one's been willing to buy more of them since they're so expensive. But now that the primer shortage is easing, you get more federal and Remington, even Fiocchi primers. Now, some of you might ask, how many primers should I keep? And I would say as much as you're willing to put up with. I myself have a very high tolerance for keeping components that I may or may not need and buying things that I may or may not need. So I have a very high, this is a block 1,000, that's 400 tolerance. There's another block 1,000 for keeping around components. There's another sleeve. Oh, that one still has the price tag on it. 17 or 18 bucks. For buying things that I may or may not need in the future. What I will say is you should buy some, you should keep a stockpile of them just in case there's another primer shortage and you need more. However, I wouldn't go so far as to copy me. This is a lot of primers. A shit ton of primers, really. But I've seen people with more. Let's zoom out a bit, actually. There we go. By no means am I a hoarder of primers. I've seen people with cans upon cans of this stuff. I've seen people buy cans upon cans of the stuff. But to answer your question, however many you want. This is a free country, as much as people like to try to make it counter so. So, go ahead and buy out as many primers as you like. As for a recommendation, whatever's cheapest. If you're going to stack them deep, stack them cheap and stack them deep like I do. Remington stuff, by far, is the cheapest and fits into the smallest area. This is 1,000 versus these German military primers, which is also 1,000. I'd say this is smaller. There you go. And the sleeves are definitely the smallest. Federals are definitely the largest sleeves. These are only 100 round packs, so do with that as you will, that information. So to answer that question, whatever's cheapest and what you find is reliable. All of this stuff I keep in a drawer in a cool, dry place, and all of it has been reliable. I have not, let's say, tried my reloads in a negative 30 degrees. I don't know if these will hold up. I know some guys that go hunting in the Yukon and they swear by having only large rifle primer magnums used in their rifles because anything else, they swear, will not ignite. But I don't know how true that is. In my experience, regular stuff is fine, cheap stuff is fine, as long as you don't get it from some back alley. I'm so glad someone just passed. So, thank you for revving your engine outside, buddy. But yeah, hopefully this answers some questions. I can't really check off my question sheet. It's under a mountain of primers anymore, or now, so hopefully this video helps. If not, send me the question that you have and I'll answer it the best I can, although I'm no expert in this. I'd like to help if I can. Anyway, you boys have a nice day, you boys and girls, and I'll see you later. Man, I was recording in vertical this entire time. And I gotta clean up these stupid primers. God damn it.